I want to thank our sponsor, Planet Ford. Planet Ford has always been a proud supporter of law enforcement in the community, providing customer service and fleet management, sales, and service. If you're looking for that personal quality service, contact Planet Ford in Spring or online at planetford.com. You're listening to Crime Scene Today. I'm your host, Dan Zentek, joined by co-host Leslie McCauley, and we're going to be talking about current issues facing law enforcement from the news and headlines that were pulled in the last part of February. So thank you for joining me, Les.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
A couple of things that sort of stood out to me, some I guess, big headlines. One that sort of feeds into the other here. It was talking about more pedestrians getting hit, more pedestrians being involved in accidents. And one of the comments that was made on that, said that U.S. pedestrian fatalities reached a 30-year high last year. This is from the New York Post. Nonprofit Governors Highway Safety Association quoted the many factors, quoting economic conditions, population growth, weather conditions, fuel prices, and the last part they said changing patterns of drug use and decriminalization of marijuana. And one of the things, no matter what some people's opinion on decriminalizing marijuana is or not, we've often wanted to talk about the impact as far as to policing, whether it's in Colorado or Washington or other places that is legal, and to a point, I guess, depending on your current society, and I think that's really where it's sort of been left to, right? Because even though it's still federally against the law to sell marijuana, we have dispensaries all over, and this has been under Democrat and Republican presidents that they have not gone out federally enforcing this. So it pretty much has fallen back to local states to decide, is this something you want, and is this something that your society accepts as far as marijuana? Now, I can tell you from being in law enforcement as long as I have, I can see the impact as far as driving and lackadaisical attitudes and the end result of this. And then there's also people that, like they'll say, as far as people drinking, that they're functioning drunks, they're functioning on marijuana, and they have a life that they live with this, right? Mm-hmm. But one headline that also stood out to me, and this one just blew me away, was in Hawaii. In Hawaii, so this was out of the Associated Press on February 15th, and Hawaii is considered decriminalizing possession of small amounts of dangerous drugs. So they're looking at heroin, meth, morphine, and cocaine and making those misdemeanors.
Which is just shocking to me.
How many conversations we had recently on the opioid epidemic, and just about every officer now is carrying Narcan. I know we had a couple of instances in the past few months where our officers had to use it on overdose.
Right.
And, and here we have a state that's considering, not really decriminalizing to a point. They're not going to be felonies anymore, but I guess for a misdemeanor, then you could have cocaine, morphine, heroin, meth. That just blows my mind.
Right. Well, and the thing that stood out the most to me is, in this brief summary, that the bill states that incarceration has no effect on rates of drug use or overdose deaths. I was just shocked to see that. And I'm wondering, what data is there? What kind of studies do they have, to substantiate that? Because we see the impact of drug use in our local area with the type of suicides, the type of accidental deaths that we come across, the overdoses, suspected overdoses. And it seems like there's just now the initiative over the last several years to really put data together on a bigger scale of how many of these deaths are drug related, of course, and to try to come at it from different angles, figure out which angle in the investigation where we can go track down the dealers and go after the dealers for criminal charges and find associates and, that kind of thing, instead of just working it
Well,
at a simple death investigation.
and how many times in our cases that, I mean, they say here that, there's, that incarceration has no effect, but there are many users that by entering into the criminal justice system, I know that really shouldn't be the solution, but by putting them into the criminal justice system, they go to drug court, they get drug counseling, they get things that they would not get outside of entering that. And again, I know that shouldn't be the solution. The law enforcement criminal justice system shouldn't be the solution for many problems that we're tasked with, drug abuse, mental health, all those things, right? But I know that one very proactive judge, Phil Grant in our area, has done some great work with the drug court. And I know he's posting all the time of his graduates, I guess that's what you call them,
Right.
from drug court that have met all these requirements. So I don't see how it's not beneficial to certain people that you've heard the stories of. That's like the hitting rock bottom, right, when they finally got to that point. Others, it's not.
Right. And if you're impacting one person, then that's one person that we're not working a death investigation on. And, hopefully they continue down that path and use it for good to talk to other people and, explain that you can still get your life back together and be a productive member of society without it.
I mean, I think one of the arguments that we always hear as far as drug use, and I guess it's a common, in my opinion, misconception as far as that we have a lot of people sitting in prison for nonviolent offenses, for nonviolent drugs. And I just can't wrap my head around, because I find it so rare. And maybe it's because of the types of crimes that we work and have worked for many years, but violence is around the drugs.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
they
often go hand
the robberies.
Yes.
Yeah, the killings, everything. I mean, it's they're associated. I mean, robberies over marijuana. We've worked those deaths. We've worked, people that are amped up on meth. That one sticks in my head of the guy who would cut his girlfriend up with a machete. Right. I mean, this is someone messed up on this that has led to violent things. So yes, he went to jail for murder.
Right.
But prior to that, he was in jail for meth. So. I really struggle with the nonviolent part of the drug world, right? Even in movies and things that we don't like to refer to, it's not always the real thing. But I mean, you don't see any type of drug TV show, drug movie, or whatever that violence is not part of that show, right?
Right. Yeah, so, I think we've.
One.
Go ahead.
One case that stuck out to me was we had a bank robbery in our southern part of the county, and it was a person who had spent all of their money on drugs, and now their rent was due. So they walk in to rob the bank just to get the rent money. He was captured not long after. He did not display a gun. He didn't actually have a gun. He stated he did. He threatened with it or whatever. But he was stopped, went to jail, and his whole purpose was he was glad he was caught. He wanted drug counseling. He wanted to receive help. But either way, he was willing to go into a bank, threaten someone to get money to pay for his drug habit.
Right, and that desperation. Absolutely.
Well, and I mean, out of all the many murders, suicides, different things we've seen, is, so many people will make the comment to us when they see someone who has killed someone or done a horrible act, and they're like, how could they be in their right mind? They have to have been insane, and not so much of the criminal insanity we're talking about, knowing right from wrong, but just that they're not right. And how many of those people that were quote not right was more related to their drug use? Someone was up for 3 or 4 days on meth, or someone just had been using drugs, and this has now become their life.
Right. or the murders that we have even over drug deals going bad. There's still the buyer and the seller, and for whatever reason, trust or, whatever the case is. And then next thing we know, we're working a murder on that. It still solely revolves around the drug use. So I'm baffled by it. I would love to read more and see what ultimately happens with Hawaii in this bill. I'd be surprised if it actually passes, but you never know how these things go.
Well, I mean, I would hope that there's some common sense. They realize that the massive impact that would have, and
Right.
I am curious to have a conversation with law enforcement that actually is in Washington, that's in Colorado, to truly understand the impact. I mean, not from the media side, not from the media's view, but truly, has this increased their call volume? Has it decreased? Has it actually relieved some of the lab work that needs to be done because they're not sending marijuana there? Has it really balanced out? The biggest proponents will say that it brings tax dollars in and that they're actually receiving money for it. But, does that have to go to pay for more officers? Does that have to go to handle more resources for homeless or other problems that come up due to this? I'd really like to have some insight from someone who's truly dealing with this versus sort of a bias from one side of the media or otherwise.
Right. Well, and I remember reading an article probably within about a year and a half after Colorado legalized marijuana, and that their death rate had actually increased from legalizing marijuana. So they were seeing an increase with the amount of not overdose, but drug related deaths since that point. So I would be curious to see if that has continued to incline or if it's leveled out, or was there some other underlying factor that came into play with that? So,
yeah, the one thing that I've seen just over the years, I mean, again, no matter what someone's opinion is the common theme I see is the apathy level when someone is using.
right.
They're just very much I guess that's why you use it, right? To not care,
Mm-hmm.
right? But even talking to some business owners and things in Colorado area, as far as hiring employees and that seems to be a common theme of the very non-caring whether they have the job or don't have the job. It's just
Right.
To the next event type of thing, right? But we have an issue here in Texas related to the marijuana laws that we had in last legislature, where it seemed to be that they were focused on making hemp and I guess the agriculture part of hemp legal. And so therefore they decided to define what hemp was versus cannabis. And the legal definition that Texas came up with was a certain percentage of THC in the plant or otherwise that would make the differentiation between it being hemp or it being cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess failed to do their research there. And what was found after they passed this law is that our state labs are incapable and do not have the technology, resource, or otherwise to actually test for a percentage of what level of THC is in the plant.
Right. And even to that extent, as soon as we all recognized that the state lab did not have the abilities, we started researching private labs that we could even potentially outsource to. And it was a struggle to even locate ones that were accredited, that we could send evidence to be analyzed. And ultimately, it came to the point where they realized that we need to invest resources into the state labs to get them up to speed. And that's kind of the direction that it took.
So, I mean, at this point, I mean, even though it's not legal, if we can't test it, then we have a backlog of evidence sitting there.
Yep.
And on the other side of it, you have a person who, was stopped or detained or arrested or whatever happened that you don't have the necessary evidence and elements that you need to prosecute it. So I know that's been a struggle with the DA's office.
Mm-hmm.
Our DA is very aggressive towards handling problems in the community of what they see as problems, and drugs being a serious problem, to address those. So certainly he stepped forward immediately saying that, it's not legal. We're still going to enforce it, where there have been some surrounding counties that basically have sort of backed off and not outright said it's legal, but that they're just not touching it.
Right, exactly. They're not going to pursue those charges.
Yeah. And I know in most recent, we've heard from DPS Labs saying that they are working on testing stuff for felonies. They aren't going to be able to test misdemeanors to keep up with it, that it's more of a funding and a resource type of thing, more than it is the technology at this point. They're coming along with the technology, but the amount of cases that are out there is just too overwhelming without the resources or funding to handle those.
Right. So that leads you to question what's going to happen with these misdemeanor cases. Where are they going to fall?
Right. So inevitably, have we made marijuana legal by not being able to meet the elements of the offense?
Right. Right. And where do we go from there?
So that, right. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, and over the course of the next year with the labs, and whether private labs step up, whether we have money dedicated to it, or whether we need to revisit and decide what we're going to do with that. But it's also not the first time that there have been laws that I think are just sort of thrown out there and without a lot of research. There's a couple that really come to mind in the past legislatures that I refer to them as the feel-good laws, that by name they sound great. They sound like something that people want, but they're useless. One, at least ours in Texas, is the it's supposed to be it's not a hands-free law. It was a no texting while driving law, right? And what I found ridiculous of it is that, so to read the law, it basically says you can't text while driving. Right. And that makes sense. That's awesome. And we all know the dangers of it, but that was it.
Right.
Meaning that the way the law is written, you can check your email.
Yeah.
You can post on Facebook.
Yep.
You can read your Facebook. You can read your news. You could, all that stuff, but you just can't text.
That's right.
And an officer has to see you texting. And if you're stopped at a stoplight, you can text.
Right.
So you have to be moving. We have to see through your window,
yes.
See that you're texting at the time. And in case that wasn't hard enough, they also said that if it's an emergency, then you can text.
Right.
And they didn't define emergency. Now, emergency of me would be something in which an emergency service was needed, sure, such as EMS, fire, police, that type of thing, right? But since it didn't constitute emergency, it could be that you're 15 minutes from picking up your child and you're late, right? That's an emergency to you. Or, hey, someone called and you needed at the house to get something, so it didn't define emergency. Right. So it's useless, right? Much. I mean, until we go back and revisit that, it's just one of those laws that
sounded good.
Again, we need a texting while driving law. We put one out there, right? A true one would be a hands-free law. I mean, I think majority of people have some way to Bluetooth in their car these days. Right. And even they have additional things, like if it's not built into your car, to pay for like $5 or $10 for a thing that goes on the visor or something.
Right.
But I mean, just about every phone has the capability of Bluetooth.
Absolutely. Yeah, the technology is there, and it's no longer something where it costs an arm and a leg in order to put something in your vehicle that might not be outfitted for it. I mean, you can easily hop on Amazon and find something for $10. You can go to the local store and be able to get something. Now, obviously, with a little bit more money invested in it, you probably get much better quality. but the end result is it's readily available. So it's certainly feasible and a much better option, I think.
Well, and I mean, we're not the only ones that have had trouble with this. So, like I said, we're talking out of things that have come from news headlines. So, February 25th, the Associated Press, Utah, has a bill to ban drivers' handheld phone use. And apparently, they've had a law on the book that has been illegal since 2007. But the law stated that they could not enforce just for that. They had to enforce for another law on top of it, meaning that if you saw someone driving with the phone, you couldn't pull them over for that. They had to also be speeding or also be breaking some other law before you could stop them. So apparently that's the big change, is that the fact of you using the phone in and of itself is against the law, and they actually are going to be able to enforce that. So we're not the only ones who make some crazy laws that make it difficult.
And I
for
can
us
imagine that that's a issue that affects every state and probably country. Cell phones are just a normal part of our functioning daily lives, and I think that just it's become so commonplace that to go anywhere, I bet any jurisdiction is struggling with these kind of laws as well.
So the let's see, the other some other topics here that have come up. One was about recruiting, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but it looks like Detroit is looking to hire 400 new officers. That was out of the Associated Press. They are going to spend $500,000, $500,000 in advertising for 400 officers. They're going to run 2 video ads for 30 seconds. They're going to have digital media, posters, billboards. And they said that it started in late January. Applications are up by 35%. So I guess to a point it's working. But I guess the bigger question is, so what do you think is, I guess, stopping people from entering law enforcement now versus in the past?
Well, I think there's probably several issues that are happening. Number one, so they're saying that their applications they have increased by 30% or 35%. I would be curious to know how many of them are quality applicants. Are they getting? Yeah,
absolutely. How many are good?
Right,
or
right.
Filling them out.
I mean, we've had applicants who have come in for interviews, and part of the screening, when was the last time you smoked marijuana? And one response was, in the parking lot before I came in. Okay, clearly law enforcement is probably not the best fit. And so, I
don't know. We may be getting to that point. I mean, we just talked about the marijuana thing. I mean,
right. But I think, to me, what I see the bigger issues as far as facing society is the general outlook and tone towards law enforcement that is sweeping across our country. And I still believe that there are way more people that support law enforcement and public servants in general than people who are anti-police. However, I don't know what's the word.
I think the media sort of drives that too. I mean, we've had some class. I know you went through some too. One of the leadership training courses that travels around the country is called FBI LEADA for law enforcement. And we had some instructors come down. Again, they teach all over the nation, and they were, of course, down here in Texas, and they made the comment that they were glad not to be in law enforcement as it is right now, and they know the struggles that we're going through with the public and the community, and the problems that they've had, and this, that, and other, and everyone just has sort of a strange look on their face, and we're like, what are you talking about? And apparently they'd come from some of the more northeast of the country, where there are some big problems between police and citizens, the community, and building those relationships. And pretty much down here, we're like, we don't have that problem. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's some conversations to be had in certain parts of the community to build those relationships. That's not what I mean. But for the most part, right. But we have so much support out there. During during the hurricanes, there was not a time we
Right.
had to worry about food. We had so much delivered up to the station. If we're ever out, it's always thanking us
Mhm.
for our service and for what we do. And it's more rare that we have someone that is outwardly against the police or what we do than it is not here. And I guess that's unique to this and not to other areas of the country. So, yeah, I mean, that certainly plays a factor. And I think the media
Mhm.
driving that um,
Right.
of those issues, right? I mean, it's whatever makes
Right.
the
And
story.
I think the social media factors in as well. When we were both on patrol, and certainly the officers that were in the field well before us, we didn't have to worry about the cell phones being so readily available and people videotaping everything. I mean, we didn't have to worry that if we were in a fight or we there was some other incident going on, that we couldn't count on the witnesses and the bystanders to come to our aid if necessary or something like that. Versus you hear these stories of, there's a struggle on the side of the road and there's people that are standing by just videotaping so they can put it on YouTube or something like that. That didn't factor into our daily lives as police officers during that time. I mean, it wasn't there. So I wonder how much of that factors in too, of that fear of, you've got those cases where, seemingly with the facts that are presented, the officer, however he or she reacted, was in the right. However, they've already been quote unquote crucified in social media. So their ability to have a fair trial is severely affected now. And that seems to happen throughout the country. We hear cases that pop up, and at least for me, it seems like it's slowed down in the more recent years, and I'm glad about that. So I'm hoping that people are starting to realize that the rhetoric that's going on and the hype that's going on in the media, they really need to start looking into the facts and find out before jumping to conclusions on either side what actually occurred in that incident.
And I would agree. I think it has lessened. It's not there, and I hope that you're right. I hope that it's because that there's been sort of a change in the culture or change in the thought. I'm more concerned that it's just because there's something else going on right now. It's the bigger political scene right now, as we just had Super Tuesday this week, and we have all the primaries and everything else. In other words, there's other things for people to be clicking
Yeah.
on in the news, right? And we know that the popularity of a story drives the media, because no matter what people's thoughts of the media is,
Right.
it's a business. It's a business that they make money by their sponsors, and their sponsors pay by how
Yep.
many people are watching. And one new thing that I'd learned over the past couple of years in talking to some media people and things like that is there's a new type of journalism out there that's actually very shocking and very concerning. Is there are now reporters that are paid by the click. In other words, you don't get a paycheck unless someone clicks on your story. And that's why you see some of these sensationalized headlines that are cut off like clickbait, but they're actual news. And you have to click on them to see the rest of the story. And sometimes there's not much to the rest of the story, but you're paid by how many times they click on you. So
Yeah.
you think about that as far as the integrity and all that of the media, of what it should be of a true journalist aspect. And then you put in, well, your paycheck is based on how exciting your story is going
No
to be,
kidding.
right?
Wow. Yeah, that puts a whole other perspective on the
So,
driving force
you know,
there.
and, right, and it again, it's whatever is selling, whatever's popular. Back to some of the laws. One thing that I had seen also as a headline that just totally threw me off and gave me to question is, we talked about the marijuana laws and prosecutors deciding, or DAs deciding, hey, we're going to prosecute this, we're not going to prosecute this. it really raises the question of, does a DA have I guess they have the authority, do they have the right to just decide certain laws to enforce and not to enforce? And where I saw this really stand out is in San Francisco, or whatever county that is in California, that they decided that not to prosecute for prostitution and other misdemeanor crimes of sexual nature or otherwise. I mean, and no matter your opinion of some of those crimes, if it's on the books,
it's still a law.
I mean, I guess, to take it to the extreme, could a DA decide that aggravated robbery is just not a crime anymore, and not prosecute for that? I mean, I know that's to the ridiculous level and extreme, because there's people getting hurt and this, but I mean, to what extent do they get to decide what's a law and what's not a law versus the legislature?
Right. And I don't even know if it's so much of whether they get to determine or decide what's law and what's not going to be law versus what they're going to invest their resources in to prosecute. Right.
What they're going to prosecute. Right. What they're going to accept charges and take to trial.
We've seen that, with other jurisdictions, with supposed lesser crimes, the drug crimes. We've seen it with, Class Cs, where we're not going to incarcerate for Class C citations or, this and that. And I think there was an issue even with Harris County, where the DA opted not to enforce. And I can't remember what specifically it was, but I remember there being a backlash because of that decision as well. And that might be more.
Well, I know there was honestly, to a point, a harsh conversation between our DA in Montgomery County and the Harris County DA over marijuana laws.
That's what I was thinking, marijuana based, but I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, I think it was over the marijuana laws, and even recently, they're starting to instead do ticket and release for some lower crimes. And when I say lower, I'm thinking like Class A and Class Bs. And I don't know. I mean, I guess to a point there has to be somewhat of a balance there. I mean, certainly we need to remove violent people off the street, people that can hurt others and that type of thing. And in Harris County, you have the third largest county in the nation, and trying to balance between your jail population, your amount of crimes that you can prosecute versus the court and the prosecutors that are available to do so. I mean, at what point do you have to start finding other solutions? But obviously it's never a solution you want to hear. We're just going to ignore certain
especially if you're
activity,
the victim of one of those things, that just re-victimizes you all over again.
Right. It's not that important to you. Now, another law that came out, and maybe you can give some insight to this, the booking procedures in which now say that I think it actually says we shall take DNA in certain arrests, but there was it was an unfunded mandate, and basically they said that the sheriff shall do this on certain crimes when they're booked in, but there was nothing to test it at DPS, and if it ever became funded, then DPS would have to do this or whatever. What's currently happening as far as at Montgomery County? Are they storing this, or what are they doing with DNA samples at booking time?
I'm not aware of what's happening with DNA at the time of booking. I know we had talked about that a while ago and looking at the potential for the DNA testing. But at that point, the system that we were looking at wasn't validated. So I am not aware of them collect.
So you're talking about the rapid DNA
and because
stuff?
of that, that's where that was kind of put on the back burner, because that system wasn't validated.
Well, and so that's two I guess, to a point, two separate things. But I mean, certainly you could use rapid DNA for it, but it would be
Right.
cost prohibitive with the amount of cost on it and stuff. But yeah, under the last legislature, they talked about the fact that where before it was only like one crime or so that you could actually take a DNA swab during booking, and now there's a pretty good laundry list of them. But it was another one of those laws that's like, hey, do this. What do we do with
Right.
it after
So
we do it? Yeah,
right,
there's not a
right.
plan.
And I
Right.
do, now that you mentioned that, so I do recall they don't go through our crime lab. What I think is happening is they are utilizing the state kits, the kits that are put together by the state, which we would often use if somebody came in under court order. Then we would collect DNA, and it's a addressed, it's an assembled kit provided by the state in which is sent back to the state. So I believe that's probably what they're using, to where it doesn't come through
Right. I
our
mean, that would
office.
make
So I'm
sense.
not fully aware of the procedures. But that would make the most sense that they
Right.
collect it and then it goes right into the mail back to the state.
I mean, it's awesome as far as the way it's heading, at least, I guess, from a
Right.
law enforcement perspective. Obviously, there's other arguments to that under freedom and civil liberties and otherwise. And the biggest argument on it is now we're able to take DNA
Right.
before you
Right.
have been convicted. And the law is also very specific to the fact that if you are found not guilty, if you are not convicted, that
Right.
DNA has to be destroyed. And matter of fact, also from the headlines of February 20th, New York Times, New York police to remove DNA profiles of non-criminals from databases. They had 82,000 profiles that came under fire because they were people, again, that were not convicted, that were taken during time. So they had a local database, which again is great in the big scheme of things. And the idea behind that is if we were able to take people that were booked in and have a local database, one of the problems that we talked about earlier with the state lab is they don't have the resources many times to do DNA on property crimes. They'll do it on violent crimes, those type of things. So you have a lot of burglars out there that you could take a DNA swab, and if you checked against your local databases, we're well aware many criminals are repeat offenders. We've had them in for this or that. It goes back to our drug conversation. They may have come in for drugs. Now they're breaking into houses to pawn stuff to get more drugs. That if they're in a local database, you get a hit and can have that. So, I mean, I think the idea behind it is great. I think it's sort of the future of law enforcement as far as us having that. You're right. The rapid DNA, which is about the size of an intoxilizer machine, not much bigger than just a box that you would sit on a table, and doesn't require a great deal of knowledge on how to work it. You just take a swab, put it in. But the last that I had checked on that, the actual device itself was about $250,000. And for each plastic tray that held 5 samples, you were looking at about $1,500 per tray. And that was whether you use 1 sample or 5. It's gone. It's a disposable type tray because it had all the chemistry and everything in it to do. Where I see that being a benefit, where I see that sort of being the future in law enforcement, is with the crimes against children and sexual assaults and such. If currently, if I have a he said, she said, and I have a young child and she's claiming that her uncle sexually assaulted her, and I have biological fluid and that's on the scene, and I can test that against a known sample of the uncle, and in the rapid DNA in 90 minutes, I have a match, right? And so, my thought is if I can get a presumptive, if I still have to send this off to the state and do a much more thorough, but if a presumptive allows me to get an arrest warrant and take him off the street while I go pay for the Right. That's where I see the next
Absolutely.
step, hopefully.
And
So,
I think, with that and
you know,
with the issue in dealing with New York, I think it, ultimately it seems like it comes down to what are the proper protocols and the plan in order to proceed forward. Do they have the proper audit in place that, if it is that somebody has been, the charges have been dropped, or um, the record's been expunged, that kind of thing, that they have the resources and the manpower to go back in and, and delete that profile or whatever the case is. So again, it, like a lot of things in law enforcement, it seems to come down to manpower and resources. So, we can have all the plans in place, but if the means are not there for it to follow through, then I think that's where a lot of the systems break down.
no, and I think you're right. There does have to be a framework and guidelines, and I think it was said best again another news article from the UK in talking about the
Mhm.
use of AI. That it was actually in Britain, and they talked about speaking of facial recognition and DNA and
Mhm.
biometrics and AI and all these emerging tech, that there's been an argument over just legislative framework and debate in their parliament, and basically the police pretty much just said, "Give us the
Right.
law, and we'll work within it." Come up with the guidelines that you want us to follow. Let's talk about those and set those in place. And that goes back to, like you said before, with New York. Once you have those guidelines of, yes, we're going to take this, but afterwards we're going to purge this, and there's an audit and whatever has to happen, so that we have the resources and ability to move law enforcement further into the future with this technology, but also with respect of other people's privacy, and to utilize it to protect our community, and not where we have a database of
Right.
people that don't need to be in there.
Right. And I can't, kind of feeding off of that, of the give us the law and we'll work within that. Give us the law to start that conversation. Like you said, this is the goal. This is what we want. Give us time to acquire those resources and get the protocols in place before the law goes into effect. So we're not putting the cart before the horse, like so many times happens.
Right. I mean, it goes back to that. I'm not sure how, because I know that laws don't happen without so many checks and balances. I mean, every law that goes to our state legislature ends up in a committee. There's experts in that committee that talk about it. There's people that come to defend it. Some that come, to
Mm-hmm.
argue against it. I mean, it's how we had a law, like I said, that made it all the way through in reference to THC, that no one ever asked the question, hey, do we have the ability
Right.
to test for this? I still can't wrap my head around, out of so many people and being involved in the process, that no one came up with that question. And who knows, maybe it did, and other people have ignored it for the fact to try to have this as a workaround, right? That basically maybe some people wanted to make it harder to prosecute. I don't know what the agenda item was there. Hopefully there wasn't one. It was just a lack
Well, and I
of
wonder
investigation.
if with the marijuana law, if that really originated, not so much with farmers, but with mercantiles, as far as, there's a lot of different products that can be made with hemp. And so on the economy side, not even factoring in the law enforcement aspect of it, of, this could potentially open up more economy, boosting the economy because more products can be readily sold, and not thinking of the criminal justice side of it. And now we're jumping through hoops trying to rectify that side of it because it wasn't thought of up front.
No, I certainly agree, and I believe that a majority of it was under the
Right.
agricultural side. It was under crops. It was
Farm bill.
under the many things you can make and all that. And you may be correct. It may have never even made it to a criminal justice committee. It may have been on the agricultural side and their committees, and
Right.
not linked the two together. But obviously, at some point, someone had to come up
Right.
with the definition. Right, someone had to come up with this percentage, and again, someone had to have a conversation of why was it a 0.03%, not a
Right.
0.05, or not. I
Not
mean,
just an
so
arbitrary
um,
number.
and right, so I mean, and I would believe that at that point, again, someone would have had to have been able to test for it to
Yeah.
say, well, this is what
Right.
makes
How are
this
we
that
going to
level, right?
validate it
So.
or verify
Um,
that it meets this criteria?
Right, but no, I totally agree. I think that a very big focus was on agriculture, was on the commercial market of using hemp, and there was a great deal of focus to try to make sure that farmers and people that were able to grow that were still
Mhm.
capable to grow that and make that
Right.
free commerce available. So I think that'll wrap up this week as far as just talking about some of the different law enforcement issues, and we sort of focused on laws and drugs and other things this week. But these were just some of the things that came out of the headlines, and we always like to sort of give a point of view just aside from the media and just more of a law enforcement perspective on them. And I appreciate you joining me, and we'll be back another time to discuss some more things.